from one spot to the next spot, and so that they'll keep on going around. So it's a very important part of the community to get people out and also meeting each other.
You've mentioned that many, there are some playgrounds in, for example, Monterey or South Auckland, which are just not up to standard, that they're not like the playgrounds you see elsewhere.
Yes, so we get a lot of feedback through our local board plan consultation, which we've just had now, same feedback, and we can see at our playground, there's a lot of them that they're called neighbourhood parks, and the playgrounds there might have a slide and a small sort of jungle gym and maybe some swings, but there's nothing sort of substantial. Yeah. So and the board, yes, we do get funding to renew those playgrounds. I guess it's a historic sort of thing with the Manukau City Council. I mean, they did put playgrounds around the community, but they're all those sort of little vanilla type sort of small playgrounds, and we need, especially with our families out here, where you might have some the kids aging and ranging in age from sort of newborn to 18. You've got to have something for everyone and enough for them to go around. So that's the challenge we face. We do have funding, of course, for our renewals, but it's limited funding, and it's how we manage that funding. So as the Manarewa local board, my first term was the last term, previous term when I came on the board, and one of the things we did is we identified that there was this sort of need for a larger playground, and so we did that at Keith Park, which is down the end of Weymouth, and that was a all abilities playground.
Right.
So it's for children with all abilities and disabilities, and with that we actually got Recreation Aotearoa Playground of the Year award for 2020. So it can be done within the budgets, but it's we've also got to maintain our facilities as well.
But more needs to happen. Hey, Joseph Allen, Chair of the Monterey Local Board, thank you very much about that. Playground inequality. Nick, well, you're a former mayor. You want to see all kids of all ages and abilities and backgrounds have access to a jolly good background, right?
Oh, undoubtedly. And actually, I was quite proud as Mayor of Porirua, the youngest community in the country. We put the largest and most expensive playground in the poorest suburb. We spent 10 years ago over $1 million in was a lot of money then on $1.5 million in Waitangirua, and that we kept that investment up. I mean, I don't think there's any excuse for the woman here, the mother who's been petitioning in South Auckland for 5 years. They've had several opportunities, the council there or the local board, to fund her request. And to me, if a community asks, work with them and come up with solutions. I think there should also be a better sharing of resources between the Ministry of Education, for instance, and councils. You can, if you focus around areas, you can do more with the resources you've got. So, yeah.
Yep. We're out of time. Nikki, we'll have to sort of leave your playground thoughts to another time, but I appreciate you both being on the panel today. Nikki Pellegrino and Nick Leggett, thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks, Ross.
Checkpoint next. I'm Wallace Chapman. See you tomorrow, 3:45. Till then, bye.
Koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere ake nei, Checkpoint has finally found Michael Woodhouse's homeless man. Trust me, you want to hear the details. They call her Crusher for a reason. Judith Collins plans to deal gangs a blow. She joins us live. Has an $800,000 report just confirmed what Auckland Mayor Phil Goff already suspected: the fight to get funding for a severely disabled foster child. The Pike River recovery operation's been shut down after carcinogens are found in the entry tunnel. And the Dunedin Cathedral is standing strong after a fire ripped through its roof. Services could resume as early as tomorrow. And Ashley Bloomfield with a giant cotton bud up his nose. Don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. A Christchurch retirement village is in lockdown and its residents are being tested for COVID-19. Village Palms in the suburb of Shirley says some residents with flu-like symptoms have been isolated to prevent further infection. Its general manager, John Amsbury, says there's nothing to suggest they have anything other than normal flu. But the Canterbury DHB and Public Health Services have been notified as a precaution. The DHB says it's working to establish the facts before any public statements are made. It's been a tale of two campaigns today and a raft of hefty policies from National and none from Labour. Both party leaders are on the campaign trail, but with very different strategies, as Craig McCulloch reports.
Today was a whistle-stop tour for the National Party with stop-offs in Taupo, Arapanui, Tiro and Cambridge. Along the way, Judith Collins made bold promises on law and order, a ban on gang patches and a dedicated police unit. On conservation, 2 new national parks. In contrast, no policy from Labour, which is keen to keep the focus on its COVID-19 response. Jacinda Ardern paid a visit to a mask manufacturer in Whanganui to thank them for their work. Quizzed by reporters, she said the party's tax policy will be out very shortly. This is Craig McCulloch.
6 people have been arrested and 4 homes seized in a police swoop on the mongrel mob in Hawke's Bay. 14 search warrants were used in raids today. Assets seized include vehicles and Harley-Davidson motorbikes. The police also found 1.5 kilograms of cannabis, 7 firearms and $100,000 in cash. Detective Inspector Mike Foster says gang criminals are out to make as much money as possible.
Our strategy is to not only target these offenders and take their drugs, our strategy is also to take away their wealth accumulated by the sale of both methamphetamine and cannabis.
5 men and 1 woman have been charged with various offences. Further tests are being done to establish what sort of carcinogen Pike River recovery workers have been exposed to. All work has stopped since tests revealed that an unusual substance found on the roof and walls of the entry tunnel is potentially harmful. Police staff looking at exhibits have also stopped work after being found to be covered in the residue as well. The head of the recovery agency, Dave Gawn, says it's a mystery at the moment.
The substance or the residue, I don't know, but probably from the 4 blasts that occurred in the mine. Remember, there was the gag that was used to put the fire out. All of those elements are part of the environment underground.
Dave Gawn can't yet say when recovery work will resume, but says he still expects it to come in on budget. The cause of a fire that broke out on the roof of St Paul's Cathedral in Dunedin early this morning remains unknown. Fire and Emergency Fire Risk Management Officer Scott Lanours says the blaze is currently being treated as accidental. He says the findings from an investigation are expected to be coming in coming weeks. The man who's been leading the country's COVID-19 response was himself today on the receiving end of a swab test. Ashley Bloomfield assured media he is well, but colleagues had recommended he experience the nasal passage test for the first time.
They don't have any COVID-like symptoms. I'm very well today, but it's partly just to show people what's involved because there are, some people do find it a bit unpleasant. I'll be able to give a readout on that. And also, I'm not expecting anyone to do anything I wouldn't do myself.
1 new case of COVID-19 has been reported today, taking the number of active cases to 22. The case is that of a man in his 20s who has been in managed isolation since arriving in the country from Melbourne at the end of last month. It's coming up to 4 minutes past 5. Sonny Bill Williams has called for more diversity in the Australian National Rugby League competition, where minorities dominate playing rosters but have little representation in administration. More than half of the NRL players have Māori, Pasifika or Indigenous Australian heritage, but none of the 18 teams' head coaches have those backgrounds, now that Warriors coach Stephen Kearney has been sacked. Speaking to Channel 9, Williams, who's back to play for the Sydney Roosters, called on prominent NRL figure Gus Gould to promote Māori and Pasifika in his new role as a consultant at the Warriors.
I just try and look at things from a perspective of what's the best for my people, Polynesians, Māoris, Aboriginals, the minorities, and I think that's what I would like to say and what I would like to challenge you to do is help us thrive off the field, whether it be coaches, CEOs, on the boards, that type of level.
Sonny Bill Williams. The New Zealand cyclist Patrick Bevan is set to team up with one of the sport's biggest names. He's joining Chris Froome at the Israeli team ISN on a 2-year deal from next year and will play a key support role in Froome's tilt for a 5th Tour de France title. Manchester United are through to the Europa League football semi-finals thanks to a 1-0 extra-time win over Copenhagen FC. They'll next play either Sevilla or Wolverhampton Wanderers, who square off tomorrow for a semi-final spot. That's the news.
Holy smoke, Dunedin's cathedral on fire.
There's a pervasive smell of smoke, and it's just looking at the water damage. And church is clearly the people, but these buildings are really important to us.
Holus bolus, Lebanon's government resigns.
President Michel Aoun says corruption is the problem. The Lebanese are asking, why is it the problem? He's the president.
Holding out for the Cook Islands travel bubble.
We're just asking for a chance to make a living. That's it. We're not asking for aid. We're not asking for handouts. We're just asking for a fair go.
The whole story. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, scattered showers, possibly heavy. Auckland to Waitomo and Taumaranui, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Rain heavy at times, easing from tonight. Areas of low cloud and fog at first tomorrow, then fine spells and isolated showers. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Taihape, periods of rain. Heavy falls possible for the Wairoa district tomorrow and snowfall possible for the Desert Road. Taranaki to Kapiti, partly cloudy. Rain north of Kapiti from late afternoon, clearing tomorrow. Wellington and Wairarapa, also Nelson. Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine tonight, however rain about northern Wairarapa for a time tonight. Cloudy periods and the odd shower tomorrow, but remaining fine in Nelson. Bulla and Westland fine spells, a few showers in Bulla tomorrow evening. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers about Fiordland and the south coast. Generally fine elsewhere, but scattered showers tomorrow morning. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the odd shower. RNZ National, 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and thanks for joining us. Checkpoint can tonight reveal a homeless person did in fact stay in managed isolation at Auckland's Crowne Plaza Hotel, but he had every right to be there. National's health spokesperson Michael Woodhouse claimed in June that a homeless man had breached security to sneak into the hotel and stay for free. Mr Woodhouse claimed the man hadn't returned from overseas, but documents obtained by Checkpoint pour water on Mr Woodhouse's claims, and after a thorough investigation, the All of Government Response Group found the unnamed man had actually returned to Auckland on a flight from Melbourne and accessed the hotel legitimately. And as Nick Trubridge reports, National leader Judith Collins continues to back Mr Woodhouse, despite there being no evidence of any security breach.
One of the five-star hotels housed a homeless person for a couple of weeks under the pretense that it was somebody that came back from overseas. When the person was ready for discharge, he was asked for a forwarding address, only to tell the official that he didn't have one because he was homeless. He hadn't come back from overseas. He just joined the back of the queue 2 weeks ago.
It was a sensational story of government incompetence. National MP and health spokesperson Michael Woodhouse on the AM show on June 18. He claimed a homeless man who had not arrived back from overseas joined the queue at a secure COVID-19 managed isolation facility, entered undetected and enjoyed 2 weeks of meals, luxury accommodation and baths, all on the taxpayer. Documents released to Checkpoint under the Official Information Act show the allegation triggered a thorough taxpayer-funded internal review of all 1,706 people who had stayed at Auckland's Crowne Plaza up until June 22. The review turned up just one person of interest, an individual with no fixed abode who was previously known to hotel staff because he frequented the Crowne Plaza.
He would often come into the hotel to exchange coins for money or to use the bathroom facilities.
But inquiries confirmed he did enter New Zealand from overseas, arriving on a flight from Melbourne on the date specified when he checked in. The other 1,705 people who stayed at the Crowne Plaza were also verified as legitimate guests. Woodhouse has been resolute in sticking to his allegation, though. Here he was on Checkpoint on June 24.
The absence of any evidence that it did occur is not evidence that it didn't. And in any event, if they have gone to such lengths to verify the story, they certainly acknowledge by those actions that it could have happened. I have a very reliable source who has told me what they believe to be correct, and I have communicated that. I stand by the comments that I've made.
But he wasn't so keen to talk today, with numerous phone calls and messages going unanswered.
Hi, it's Michael Woodhouse, National Member of Parliament. Sorry I couldn't take a call. Please leave a detailed message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you.
Documents released to Checkpoint last night show the probe of Woodhouse's claims included poring over hours of CCTV footage from the Crowne Plaza. Officials also sought and were granted access to CCTV footage from the neighbouring Huawei building on Auckland's Albert Street. None of the footage showed an individual sneaking into the hotel. The Minister in charge of isolation facilities, Megan Woods, says it's time for Woodhouse to walk back his claim.
We very quickly, as soon as the allegation was made, moved to investigate it because the allegation was a serious one. It was that the security of one of our managed isolation facilities could be breached in a way that Mr Woodhouse was suggesting. So we've spent many staff hours reviewing the records of the people, the CCTV footage, just making sure that we didn't kind of have those gaps in our security. And I'm confident we do not. We take it enormously seriously that our managed isolation and quarantine facilities are a strong line of defence at our border.
Other documents released to Checkpoint reveal overseas arrivals at the Crowne Plaza are only allowed off the bus and into the hotel when directed by staff. The process at the hotel means no one can walk in off the street and check into the hotel without being identified, and arrivals are ushered off arriving buses either individually or in small groups. Tight procedures at the hotel have been backed up by guests spoken to by Checkpoint. Despite the mounting evidence debunking Woodhouse's claims, his boss, National Leader Judith Collins, backed her MP when approached outside Auckland Airport this morning.
No, he's told me some time ago that he had the assurance of a senior medical practitioner. I have taken his word.
And Collins was dismissive when asked about the findings of officials looking into the allegation.
Well, just because the authorities can't find anything, I wouldn't worry about that.
Checkpoint has asked for the financial cost of investigating Mr Woodhouse's claims, but is yet to hear back. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
And National is promising to get tough on gangs and youth offenders as it hit the campaign trail in earnest today. Leader Judith Collins announced their law and order policy in Taupo today. She promised a special unit, but the name Strike Force Raptor is gone. But Labour leader Jacinda Ardern says increasing the number of police is the best way to reduce gang crime. Here's our camera team with political reporter Yvette McCullough.
Judith Collins campaigning in Waikato this afternoon with a promise that National will make the streets safer.
We are the party of law and order.
National revealed its law and order policies in Taupo today, which includes plans to tighten border controls to prevent drugs entering the country and expand the use of alcohol in drug courts. The party is also keeping up its long-held promise to crack down on gangs, which includes giving the police greater powers to search the homes and cars of gang members for guns, introduce tougher sentences for gang-related crime, and ban all gang insignia in public places. And the controversial Specialised Police Unit, better known as the Strike Force Raptor Unit, is back.
We use very plain language here. In the National Party, it is the gang unit.
The party's Justice spokesperson Simon Bridges says the police will receive more funding to set up the unnamed unit, which will target gangs.
It's going after the gangs, harassing and disrupting them every day and making sure the police have the resources to do it.
Collins and her campaign team travelled across Waikato, visiting small towns, popping into cafes to speak to locals. Flat white drinking Ms Collins, opting for something less caffeinated in Te Rao.
Occasionally I have Earl Grey tea instead to make sure I'm because I get very excited.
Locals in the small Waikato town excited too, with many lining up to get copies of Ms Collins' book signed.
Thank you so much, it's going to make us day.
Yes, I do. I love that people love my book.
Which is a good topic. Thank you.
Jacinda Ardern was campaigning in Whanganui today, flanked by hopeful Steph Lewis and Te Taihauru incumbent Adrian Rurafi. Ms Ardern says she's hopeful Ms Lewis can take the Whanganui seat And she isn't concerned about Mr Rurawhi's re-election chances, despite standing against Māori Party co-leader Debbie Ngariwa-Paka.
Adrian is very well regarded here, and for good reason. He's an exceptional MP.
On a walkabout of Whanganui's town centre, many locals were pleased to see Ms Ardern.
We'll be all voting for you again.
Very kind.
That's wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. That's very kind.
Thank you. And you're going to get in. Because I'm going to vote for the first time, because I don't want the other side.
While in Whanganui, Ms Ardern visited QSI, who produced the N95 masks used by the country's health professionals. She says she wanted to visit to thank them for their work in response to COVID-19.
They've essentially doubled their capacity, secured materials and supplies to carry them through to the end of the year, and brought on extra staff to be able to look after everyone. So I just wanted to acknowledge the work that they've done.
Ms Ardern was dismissive of National's law and order promises, saying that the key to reducing gang crime is more frontline police.
And that, I believe, is what will make the biggest difference. Unfortunately, under Judith Collins, we saw a decrease in police. And so that, to me, is the fundamental foundation of any response to increases in gang activity.
New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters was in Palmerston North today, speaking to a luncheon at Awapuni Racecourse. He says National's law and order promises sound good until you look at National's track record when Judith Collins was Police Minister.
And during that time they ran down the strike force, they ran down the numbers per 1,000. In fact, the police were seriously underfunded. So it's one thing to make promises. We need to ask ourselves, but will they hold up that promise when they get into power?
However, Ms Collins has previously said claims the national government didn't put more cops on the beat are rubbish. Mr Peters is promising New Zealand First law and order policy will be announced very shortly. For Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
And we'll be talking to the leader of the National Party, Judith Collins, shortly. But first, a highly critical report released today into council-controlled organisations in Auckland paints a picture of dysfunction, confusion and detachment from the main council. A panel led by lawyer Miriam Dean QC spent 6 months reviewing the city's 5 CCOs, an exercise promised by Mayor Phil Goff during his 2019 re-election campaign. The report recommends a merger of the events organisations and says CCOs need to stop acting so much like businesses and remember who funds them, Aucklanders. Matthew Tunison reports.
The review found that public confidence and trust in the council and its 5 CCOs is low, and it's time things were sorted out. The panel made 64 recommendations to address a lack of clear strategic direction provided by the council, and for the CCOs to strike a better balance between their sometimes competing commercial and public interests. Here's panel chairperson Miriam Dean QC.
The public feel that too much heed is paid to this notion that CCOs are commercial entities. In truth, they're not, because at heart they're community-owned assets.
The review calls for a merger between Auckland Tourism Events and Economic Development, or ATED, and Regional Facilities Auckland. Organisations, Miriam Dean says, operate in many of the same and sometimes overlapping areas.
A particular prompt for us was again listening to the public of Auckland, because one of the things that riles the public is duplication, and by merging ATED and RFA, that would eliminate a great deal of duplication that exists currently in the event space.
Another thing that gets stuck in the public's craw is the high 6-figure salaries paid to top CCO executives, such as Watercare's chief executive pay packet of between $770,000 and $780,000 a year. The panel recommended that the council sets expectations about what CCO bosses should earn. Auckland stadiums were also scrutinised, with the review panel finding they should be consolidated under joint management.
The stadium strategy has now been in gestation for some 8 years, and yet there are some looming decisions to be made about investment in our stadiums. We put it very clearly and directly in our report on behalf of Aucklanders. We do not need, nor can we afford, 4 stadiums.
Mayor Phil Goff recognises the council needs to improve its communication with the CCOs.
I think there is a gap in the high-level plans that council runs, such as the Auckland plan, and then the the practical plans and management strategies that we have, there is a gap in the middle there, and it is about the strategic direction to the CCOs.
Mr Goff called the merger idea compelling, but didn't go as far as endorsing it.
The review panel makes quite a strong case for what the benefits of that might be. They also reflect on what the risks of that might be. I would imagine that Council would need to make a decision quite promptly on whether this is the right way to go, because at the moment we will have two organisations that are in limbo, waiting to find out what their future might be.
Former chairman of Auckland Transport, Lester Levy, says he didn't experience a lack of communication with the council in his 7 years, and he found the relationship challenging rather than dysfunctional.
I guess my answer to all of this is it's all quite paradoxical. You know, everyone is always working to improve, but it is a complex structure.
The council's governing body will consider the review's recommendations before any changes are made. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Matthew Tunison.
And let's return to our earlier story now about National Party launching its law and order policy. The leader, Judith Collins, joins me now. Good evening, Judith. Can you just explain to me what specifically makes this a law and order policy launched by National, led by Judith Collins? What specifically is your touch on this policy?
Oh, well, obviously big emphasis on rehabilitation in prisons, but also more of the alcohol and drug courts, which is something that I brought into New Zealand in 2012, having seen them in the United States. That more of those, a commitment to those, more of them. But I think also, basically, there's a big focus on victims and the victims of crime. I'm also not worried about going after the gangs. I think it's a very important thing that we do. We've seen a big increase in gang numbers, and we need to knock them on the head.
OK, well, let's talk about it. A dedicated gang unit is what you're saying. How would it work?
Well, it would work in actually utterly targeting gangs in terms of their numbers, giving police the powers, such as with the firearm prohibition orders, to go into their gangs' heads, take the guns off them. I think that's one of the big reasons where people have felt very much as though they have been let down by the government in terms of firearms, with law-abiding people feeling that they're being targeted as opposed to gang members and those focused on them. But another big issue, which you could really say is a me thing, is the mental health initiative around mental health nurses working with police in what we used to call watch houses, which are now called custody suites.
Right.
That is something that started in Counties Manukau. The current government got rid of that. They've stopped that funding, and we are bringing it back and extending that out. So you could also say a social investment model around...
Well, social investment was a Bill English policy,
yeah.
So let's stick with what you were talking about with the gangs, OK?
Yeah.
I can't understand how this would be different from the organised crime unit that the police run in the major centres, and also they have a dedicated gang unit in Auckland. So what makes this different to what we already have?
Well, they will have more powers that we will give them on that. So obviously the firearm prohibition orders, but also in response
But gang members could be ruled out from owning a firearm, possessing a firearm, by the character tests in terms of licensing. So again,
So,
we already have it, don't we?
No, well, really seriously, Lisa, you don't actually think that they all go around getting licenses, do you? I mean, really, seriously? No, they steal guns, or else they have people who do have licenses who sell them to them. That's what happens now. And it is, that's how it happens. They don't just go and get licenses, although there are some who have got licenses, and that's something that should be a character test. If you're a member of a gang, patched member of a gang, how can you possibly be able to get a license to have a firearm? In addition to that, when you talk about the off-cans unit, which is what you're talking about, that was started up when just before I took over in 2008 as Police Minister. It was one of the last dying things of the previous Labor government. That was all, instead of having a serious fraud office, we kept the serious fraud office and we kept the off-cans. But we also know off-cans is only in the major city centres. So it is important, for instance, when we found out just recently...
So will you have a gang unit in every town and city?
Where they're needed. So where we had... Hawke's Bay had 2 members of a gang unit. How is that effective? That's not fair. But also, they will be able to we'll have tougher parole conditions for gang members. We will make an aggravating factor in the Sentencing Act to be a patched gang member or associated with them.
Can't a judge already take that into consideration? The judge can consider those aggravating features in sentencing. And also...
But we will make it an aggravating factor. We will also, we'll have new criminal offences targeting the violent gang crime and introducing tougher offences for that. We also think it's important to ban all gang insignia in public places. What we're seeing with this proliferation of gang members, 34% gone up in patched gang members in the last 3 years of the current government. That's an enormous number, about 2,000 extra patched gang members. We've got people being intimidated in the streets by these people, wandering around with all their insignia on. I think it's really important that we make it very important that we have a dedicated gang unit to disrupt them.
Okay, I want to talk about that gang insignia a little bit more, but before I do that, can you just quickly answer, will this gang unit, will they be armed?
Well,
routinely armed?
Obviously, no. What you need to remember, obviously not within the office, it's very important to understand, Lisa, that when I was Minister of Police the first time, we gave police the power to we gave them the funding to put lockboxes with guns in their cars so that your frontline officers already have the ability to arm themselves at their discretion. What is important is to understand is that they're not playing tiddlywinks here with these patched gang members. These people are violent. In some cases, they are methamphetamine users.
Hence my question, will you allow them to be routinely armed? That is different to having a Glock in the glove box or in the well of the car and a gun in the back drawer in the back seat.
Lisa.
So are you going to...
You're confused on this issue. Routinely arming is for all police officers, and that's not where we're going. It is utterly important, though, that I tell you that the Special Tactics Group and the Armed Offenders Squad already are armed in their work. That is natural that they will be to do so. If the gang unit needs to have arms, they will have them. They will have access to them if they need them. It is not for me to tell them to put arms on because they're, popping down the dairy. That won't be happening. It is absolutely important that we back the police to do the job that New Zealanders want. New Zealanders are sick and tired of people sitting in ivory towers telling them who should be wandering around their streets and who should be intimidating them. It will not happen with us. We are going to stop this. And I'm not going to stand by and let it happen to New Zealanders.
Lots of people have tried to stop gangs before, and indeed you did, and the previous national government tried as well. So in terms of gang, but they're still here. That's the point. So in terms of gang insignia, in terms of gang insignia, so you don't want patches. But I'm wondering, where is the line there, Judith? So obviously some of these gangs are producing clothing, not just a patch on your back, but tracksuit pants and sweatshirts that have various more subtle indicators of gang affiliations on them. Where do you draw the line?
Well, clearly, it's going to be in the detail, but obviously it is important that we don't have this sort of intimidation happening in our streets.
So where will you draw the line, though? Where will you draw the line?
Well, I'm not going to be choosing someone's tracksuit trouser colour, but I am going to be saying very clearly that we are not going to have intimidating paraphernalia from gangs being used in this way. So patches, no, gone. Do we tell people they can't have a leather jacket? No, that's not correct. But we do say, you have patches, you have the sort of paraphernalia that is absolutely associated with it. It is not going to be acceptable. I understand that there'll be some people who will say, oh, that's so unfair. But you know what's unfair is having to live next door to people like this. That's unfair, and being intimidated in your business or on your way about in your work by people who are violent thugs, who, by the way, have increased their numbers by 34% under a particularly soft-on-crime government. And I'm not putting up with it, nor should New Zealanders.
Let's move on to Mr. Michael Woodhouse. Has he apologised to you for misleading you about, and the public really, about the homeless person he said who got a free ride at isolation and shouldn't have been in there?
Well, he's been very clear to me that he has not misled me. He said, I've raised with him the issue that your reporters this morning raised with me, and said that the Official Information Act request, I think it said that the government said that they couldn't find this person. Well, okay, so they couldn't find someone. Doesn't mean to say they didn't exist. Michael Woodhouse has been very plain to me that the information he had was from a senior medical practitioner who he absolutely
professional, I think his words were, wasn't it, Judith?
Well,
a senior medical professional. So
That's
is that
what
the
he
same?
said,
Is
and
that
so I have to.
Okay, so is that the same senior medical professional who leaked him the details of the COVID-19 patients?
Well, I don't believe so at all, and he's been very.
Have you
clear to
specifically
me
asked
it
him
was
that
genuine.
for clarity?
I have been very specific. Are you absolutely certain this person is correct? And he has said yes. So he has confirmed to me.
Did you ask him to say who the
absolutely.
source was so that you can confirm it wasn't someone else who had leaked information, incorrect information or bad information to you?
I did not ask him for a source any more, Lisa, than I'll ask you for your sources. It is very important that when people provide information to the opposition, genuinely and correctly, that we are not going to go around outing them for it. And
the issue is correctly here, though, isn't it? Because there is no evidence to support it. In fact, there's evidence to the contrary, which shows someone who, of no fixed abode, returned home in a flight and took up his place in managed isolation as he was entitled to.
Lisa, the information I have is exactly what I've given you, and that is the information I have. I'm not going to doubt the word of my colleague. He has been very clear with me that I can trust his word. I take people at their face value and their word unless I have very good reason not to. And in this case, just because the government can't find something doesn't mean to say it doesn't happen.
So what conversations have you had with Roger Bridge about these allegations of alleged dirty politics?
Well, I haven't had any conversations with him. I understand the board of the National Party is meeting today, and that there will no doubt be a decision made. And I'm not having those conversations. It is very important that I have been utterly focused on policy and the people of New Zealand. I can tell you, Lisa, outside the media, absolutely nobody cares about the internal workings of the National Party. And today, the only people raising the issue have been the media and no one else.
You are a board member of the National Party, so you have also come out strong saying that you are against, you want a clean campaign, you don't want dirty politics. So are you happy with Roger Bridge's alleged behaviour?
I'm going to tell you exactly what I've told other media today. I do not approve of this behaviour. It is not something I would do. I do not approve of it. It is now a matter for the board, and that's what I'm prepared to say.
And you're part of that board, so would you like to see him gone?
All my discussions will be with the board. I won't be having them with you, Lisa, even though, it's so tempting to tell you everything that I might do. I'm not going to.
Well, let me put it another way. Are you happy to work along a person who has, indulged in dirty politics?
I think it's very important, Lisa, that we leave the matter to the board. That is the correct place for it, and I'm not going to talk about the matter anymore. I'm happy to talk about policy, and I'm happy to talk about decisions, and I'm very happy to talk to you about my decision that I will be absolutely voting against the cannabis referendum.
Okay, just before you go, Judith, have you had any discussions with Mr Woodhouse specifically today about the new information that's come to light in terms of the so-called homeless man?
Yes, I have.
And
he has confirmed to me that the information that he has previously given to me is correct.
Okay, and so you're voting against the cannabis referendum then?
Absolutely.
On what basis?
On the basis that it's recreational cannabis, sale and use, that we have, it is not medicinal cannabis, as some people have been misled to thinking. It is absolutely not something that people who care about the mental health of New Zealanders should be setting up a decision up there, the decision that tells younger people in particular that this is something that won't do you any harm. We are already facing a major meltdown in terms of mental health. That's why I put such a focus on mental health in the policing area and corrections. It is not at all, I think, in the best interest of New Zealanders for us to legalise a drug which does cause, in some people anyway, quite difficult mental health outcomes, and it is not something that I'm going to be supporting. And the National Party caucus has decided not to support it at all.
So you will vote, basically, it's not a conscience vote anymore, in essence. When they go to the referendum, everybody's going to vote this way.
The whole National Party caucus has agreed that we will not be voting for the cannabis referendum. Cannabis in the National Party is in the Misuse of Drugs Act. Misuse of Drugs Act has never been a conscience issue in the National Party. In my time in it, I've always known it to be a party position, but I can tell you that the caucus is unified.
Was that a captain's call, though? Was that something you put to them?
Not at all. Not at all. The caucus was very strongly of that view, even before I became the leader, and I absolutely support that.
Really appreciate you joining us and hope to talk to you more about your other policy launches. That is the National Party leader, Judith Collins. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the fight to get funding for a severely disabled foster child. Ashley Bloomfield says yes to the test. And Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff joins us live about that report into council-controlled organisations. Do get in touch about anything you've heard on the program this evening. Let us know what you think of National's getting tough on gangs policy. Also there, you would have just heard Judith Collins saying the party caucus is going to vote against the legalisation of cannabis when we go to the polls on September 19th. What do you make of that as well? Do text us 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Sorry, we're a little late to the headlines, but here's Susanna.
A homeless person did in fact stay in managed isolation at Auckland's Crown Plaza Hotel. However, he has every right to be there because he had returned from overseas. National's health spokesperson Michael Woodhouse claimed in June that a homeless man had breached security to sneak into the hotel and stay for free. However, documents obtained by Checkpoint found the unnamed man had actually returned to Auckland on a flight from Melbourne and accessed the hotel legitimately. Part of a retirement village in Christchurch is under strict lockdown after several of its residents showed respiratory illness symptoms. In a letter to the residents' family members, the village Palms in Shirley says as a precaution, those residents have been tested for COVID-19. Owner Jenny Stokes says the chances of positive test results are low. Bold promises on the campaign trail today from the National Party leader Judith Collins. During several stop-offs in the North Island, Collins pledged a ban on gang patches, a specialist police gang unit and 2 new national parks. In contrast, no policies were announced by Labour leader Jacinda Ardern today, who is keeping the focus on the COVID-19 response. A major review of Auckland's council-controlled organisations has concluded the city doesn't need and can't afford its 4 stadiums. An independent panel led by Auckland lawyer Miriam Dean spent 6 months reviewing the city's 5 CCOs, including the management of its stadiums. Ms Dean says they should be consolidated under joint management. The mother of one of the 29 men who died at Pike River says the safety of recovery workers must come first. All work in the mine has been stopped now that an unusual substance found on the roof and walls of the main entry tunnel has been identified as a carcinogen. 6 people have been arrested and more than $1 million worth of assets seized in a police swoop on the mongrel mob in Hawke's Bay this morning. Assets seized include houses, vehicles and motorbikes, along with cannabis, firearms and $100,000 in cash. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint, and it's time now for the business news with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, let's talk about Fletcher's. You've had a kind of sneak peek, really, into how things are going for them. What does it show?
Yeah, so the construction firm has given an update to the market about what its full-year profits for the year ended June is going to look like when they publish them next week. And they say they expect to make a loss of about $200 million this financial year. Compare that with last year, they made a $164 million profit. So when you look at it, it's quite the contrast, and the firm is putting this loss down to the major blow it was dealt by the pandemic. And look, that's been in the news a lot recently, especially as we went into lockdown. They had to lay off about 1,500 staff. That's not a cheap thing to do when you have to pay people out redundancies. They've also had to clean up previous problem projects. So look, they've seen a number of hits to their income. But the chief executive says, look, they've been able to preserve cash, but it has meant a number of tough decisions. But I think what the market will be interested with this company and its result, and a lot of other results, is the outlook. What details are they going to give us about how they plan to deal with the impact of the pandemic in the coming months? Because most investors are well aware that most companies whose financial year ended June, a lot of them sort of lost a good half or a good chunk of that quarter. So in this case, Fletcher has given us some detail, and what they're saying is that their cost base is down. They have a strong order book for 2021. They'll be working with better margins, and they're going to be dealing with less risk. And the company also says that they don't expect any more redundancies going forward. So wait and see, but hey, there are some positive signs to this outlook that Fletcher's given us.
Okay, before we skip to the markets, can you just quickly give us a rundown? Do we know what we were spending all our money on post-COVID?
Yeah, this is some of the latest electronic card data out from StatsNZ, and it says that, look, we're spending more money on groceries, clothing, hospitality and cars. And when I say more, I mean a lot more. Spending for July was up 1.2% on June and up more than 11% on the same month a year ago. ASB says, like, a lot of this is down to some pent-up demand, but we're also seeing something called, the new term for me, is nest building. All those people who spent time at home, they're deciding to really spruce things up, some home makeovers here and there, and look, I'm probably as guilty as many when it comes to that sort of thing.
Okay, let's flick to the markets. What can you tell us about goings on there today?
Yeah, the NZX is down by 1/3% by 38 points to 11,645. The New Zealand dollar is up 0.5% to 66.2 US cents, steady at 92.2 Australian and up to 50.6 British pence, and gold continues to lose ground. It's down $13 today, down to $2,013 an ounce.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with our business news there. A Woodville family has spoken about their nightmare ordeal trying to get funding and support to look after their severely disabled foster child. Dairy farmers Pip and Jules Cook care for 15-year-old Ryan with the promised help of social services. But they say the provider, Turuki Healthcare, has refused to pay them, stopped and started their payments and won't respond to emails. Turuki Healthcare, which took over the contract a year ago, puts the Cooks' complaints down to teething problems. Catherine Hutton reports.
Ryan Cook shuffles around the living room on his knees, a tablet computer with reinforced cover hanging from his mouth. He doesn't sit still. Pictures on the wall have to be hung high to stop Ryan knocking them off the walls. In a corner, a TV is playing his favourite cartoon, Barney. He also loves Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Ryan suffers from Creditor syndrome, or Chat syndrome, a chromosome disorder which causes intellectual disability and delayed development.
He also has fetal alcohol syndrome, so they're unsure. It's really difficult to know how much is fetal alcohol, how much is Chat syndrome, and they all kind of cross over. He is a little bit autistic. He also was born 8 weeks premature, so he has a whole raft of issues going on.
That's foster mum Pip Cook. She says Ryan's brain is a bit haywire. He can't speak and has the mental age of a 1-year-old.
He doesn't have any idea of safety or heat or falling off something, those kind of things. And then probably the worst thing he has is he has a condition called PECA, which means he puts everything in his mouth. So it's a sensory thing and everything goes in here, so it becomes a huge safety issue with Ryan's.
That means Ryan has to be watched 24/7. It's a routine the Cooks are used to, having had him since he was 5 months old. Uplifted one morning after his mother threatened to kill him, he was dropped at the Cooks that afternoon. An emergency placement, he was only supposed to stay 6 weeks. But they quickly grew attached to him, and fearing what would happen if they didn't take him, he stayed. With 4 kids of their own, the youngest of whom was 9, there was always someone to look after him. The Cooks say they've asked for very little in the way of financial support. A buggy to take him out on the farm and riding for the disabled lessons, which the primary school couldn't provide. Then, at the end of 2018, out of the blue, they received a call from Keystone Business Infrastructure, the organisation responsible for paying foster carers, which offered to pay them $1,200 a month for respite care, clothing and equipment, things like toys, which Ryan goes through a lot of.
We're so internally grateful because it doesn't cover anywhere near what we spend on respite carers, but it was a help that we hadn't had before, so we were pretty grateful.
The next time they heard from Keystone, it was to tell them Turuki Healthcare was taking over in July last year, but they didn't have to do anything. Then, in November, the payments suddenly stopped. Panicking and desperate to try and sort it out before Christmas, they frantically tried to reach someone at Turuki, After hours and hours of emails, phone calls, they still couldn't get a clear answer on what was needed to reinstate the funding.
At one point they wanted me to go and quote, go to farmers or quote every toy, bib, pair of pants, everything. And I obviously to that my approach was that it's just so unrealistic. A, I don't have the caregiving money to have a caregiver so I can go and do that. And B, that is just crazy. It's time and energy that didn't need to happen, you know. So.
Pip finally got an answer out of a manager.
They said, OK, we'll pay that, but only because we've decided. Actually, she said to me, I'm a mother, so I can understand that. Probably, yeah, so I've decided, which really frustrated me because should never be about a personal choice. Either we're entitled to that or we're not. So how can it be at the discretion of when you're getting a phone call from somebody else to say, hey, you shouldn't be doing that, you know? And that seems to be a pattern with them.
The care plan says their funding should be paid directly to the cooks. But Turuki refused to pay the money into Pip's account, insisting she couldn't be trusted.
And I felt that it was just an incredible distrust. You know, I'm trusted to look after a child that's 24-hour care that literally we keep alive and relies on us totally, but I can't be trusted to manage any funds. So that actually was incredibly frustrating.
Jules Cook admits his wife Pip deals with the bulk of issues around Ryan. He says he was gobsmacked by Turuki's response, which clearly placed a great deal of stress on his wife.
Just having to try and find that money and just the lack of understanding that she was met with, it was unbelievable. We've dealt with a lot of organisations and hands down they have been by far the worst.
Jules says it's not so much the money, but the attitude they were confronted with.
There's only so much money to go around and we understand that, but it was just the way that we were talked to or Pip was talked to. It was just, we've never struck that sort of rudeness before, and I suppose it's and then just you would try and find out what they needed. You'd send emails and they'd answer questions they wanted to, and they would ignore other ones. So it was just a massive, frustrating experience, really.
Asked to explain the cook's treatment, Turuki's manager of permanent caregiver support services, Vanya Douglas, blames confusion over the transition from Keystone.
When the service transitioned, there was a teething issue, which is regrettable. There was some miscommunication as a result of this.
Since Turuki took the contract from Keystone, the number of foster families actively accessing the provider's help has more than doubled, while the overall budget has stayed static at $4.7 million a year, an average of $3,600 for each family annually. Even still, Turuki says it has enough money to meet the needs of its foster families. That confidence has long been lost by the cooks. They say in the first phone call, Turuki didn't know where Woodville was, and at one point they claimed to have no record of Ryan and his needs. In February, they were emailed to say their funding had stopped, only to receive another one 20 minutes later saying they would be paid for respite care.
My manager has decided, that was the wording, that you can have the respite care but you're not having anything else until a NAS assessment is completed.
That assessment was to be done by an organisation based in Palmerston North called Mana Whaikaha, but even that was fraught.
Mana Whaikaha didn't know who they were, why they needed it. They never actually even filled out a proper application for an assessment. They just sent an email, and then that sat there for about 3 months, and they kept saying, we're not doing anything until we get this assessment.
But when the payments didn't arrive, the cooks rang them, only for Jules to get a text message to say they weren't being paid for the month because Turuki had forgotten to pay them. Pip says she'd like to see Turuki be a little more appreciative.
I'd like to be treated with respect. It's a really, really hard job that we do, and to be treated with distrust and, no respect or treated like we're trying to get something out of the system or whatever it is just horrible. And it's a fight that we shouldn't have to be doing because all foster parents who do that, 99% of us do it because we genuinely care about these kids and we need support and not treated the opposite way.
Turuki's Vanya Douglas expressed disappointment at the cook's complaints.
I am very sorry to hear that the cooks felt this way, and it is not the level of service we aspire to. While we can't verify these allegations, PCSS would never want any caregiver or child or young person to feel unappreciated.
Oranga Tamariki says it meets with Tūriki quarterly to discuss issues that arise with the service and conducts an annual monitoring review, although this has been delayed because of COVID. It says Tūriki was one of 7 organisations that tendered for the contract and has delivered health, wellbeing and social services for 20 years, but not in foster caring. But it expressed surprise when told of the cook's experience.
Since the Permanent Caregiver Support Service was contracted to Tūriki Healthcare, we've been pleased with the changes that have been made, and we believe it has benefited caregivers and the young people they care for. We meet regularly with Tūriki Healthcare to discuss progress, and no issues have been uncovered that give cause for concern.
Meanwhile, the cooks are baffled by claims of teething problems, saying their payments were already set up. They want to know how Tūriki has addressed these problems, but they're still waiting for a response from Ms Douglas to their email in February. The assessment has been done and they're on to their 3rd social worker in 9 months. Whatever happens, they say they will look after Ryan, regardless of the money, but they don't want others to have to battle the way they have. For Checkpoint, call Catherine Hutton, Tēnei.
And if you were listening to Catherine's report on radio, we'll put up the video piece on our Facebook page and our website page. It is 9 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We'd love your feedback on that story or anything else you've heard on the program this evening. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Another case of COVID-19 has been confirmed in New Zealand, this time a man in his 20s who travelled from Melbourne at the end of July. The positive test came on the 12th day of his managed isolation at the Grand Millennium Hotel in Auckland. The Director General of Health made the announcement at a COVID testing station in Cannons Creek, where he also took the test himself. Logan Church was there.
It'll be a little bit uncomfortable, but it's not going to hurt.
Today it was the Director General of Health himself in line to get a COVID nasal swab at the Oratoa Cannons Creek Medical Centre.
It was much less painful than tackling Billy Wepu on the rugby field a couple of weeks ago. I've still got the bruise to show for that.
No, he doesn't have any COVID symptoms. Instead, he's trying to show how easy it is to get tested.
So, yeah, a little bit uncomfortable, but not unpleasant at all.
The ministry plans to roll out more pop-up clinics this week. A similar clinic in Queenstown last week saw more than 1,000 tests done, helping the ministry reach its 4,000 tests a day target. 1,874 tests were processed yesterday.
We could see last week the value of those pop-up clinics in terms of getting the community numbers of swabs increased, but also in just raising the visibility and profile of the importance of swabbing.
But health centres, including this one, are seeing people turn down a COVID test. And Oratoa Clinical Director Sean Hanna says there are a variety of reasons why.
I guess it's maybe that they've had one before, maybe their friends have and they haven't liked that experience. There's lots of rumours around the place about it being an unpleasant experience. I mean, I've had a number of swabs and a number of my colleagues who've got smaller kids than I have had a lot of swabs as well. We don't have to look very far past our borders to realise that COVID-19 is still here.
Meanwhile, today a new COVID-19 case has been confirmed in New Zealand, bringing the total number of confirmed cases to 1,220.
Today's case is a man in his 20s who arrived in New Zealand on the 30th of July from Melbourne. This person has been in managed isolation in the Grand Millennium Hotel and actually tested negative around day 3 of his stay, but has tested positive on the day 12 testing.
There are now 22 active cases in New Zealand, all in managed isolation or quarantine facilities. It's also been 102 days since the last case of COVID-19 was picked up in the community. Dr Bloomfield also announced the country's flu vaccination campaign had seen record numbers of flu vaccines distributed, 1.77 million doses. This was despite challenges around getting the vaccine to where it was needed.
There were some temporary supply disruptions at the peak of the vaccination season, and that certainly caused some challenges and some angst for some of our practices around the country. We worked very closely at the time with DHBs and others to redistribute vaccine where we could. and it's pleased that in spite of those challenges we have been able to get this high level.
He says the ministry is also working on a plan to distribute a COVID vaccine if one is discovered. From Cannons Creek for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
And again, we'll stick Logan's video up on our Facebook page and online so you can check that out. Calls to further monetise managed isolation are growing louder, with veteran broadcaster Paul Henry chiming in. Henry himself, in managed isolation, having returned home, was back in New Zealand during lockdown before returning to the United States in early June to work in Palm Springs. From today, New Zealanders returning from abroad for a short trip home will be charged for their isolation stay. Paul Henry is on day 4 of 2 weeks in the Sedema Hotel near Auckland Airport, and he isn't paying. He told reporter Amy Williams that managed isolation is a well-oiled machine, but New Zealand is missing a trick after more than 100 days with no community transmission of COVID-19.
The organisation is fabulous. It's just a shame we can't monetise it. And by monetise it, I don't mean it's a shame we don't charge more New Zealanders for coming back to New Zealand. What I mean is it's a shame that we can't actually monetise it. It's a shame we can't take advantage of our COVID-free status and sell this opportunity to foreigners who would queue up to come to New Zealand, pay big money in decent managed isolation for the prospect of months of freedom in New Zealand afterwards. I think it's a crying shame that we haven't found a way to monetise that.
Yes, and there is a push, no doubt you've heard, possibly by the private sector to get a package together to present to government. Is that something you would get behind?
Oh, why haven't they already done it? Why haven't they presented it yet? You know, why wasn't this organised months and months ago? Because we knew we were going to be in this situation. It seems extraordinary to me that if we're not careful, if we're ever going to do something like this, if we don't do it soon, we will no longer be in the favoured situation we're in now, where we are one of the only countries like this. You know, we've created this wonderful, wonderful product that we're not letting people purchase.
Indeed. And so in terms of your time in Palm Springs, you would describe that as business, not holiday, or holiday?
Oh, combination. I wouldn't have gone if it was just holiday. So I suppose you'd have to say, based on that, it was business. But it was weird. I mean, it's not. I've never known Palm Springs like it before. I've never known the States like it before. There's the constant awareness, no matter what you're doing, that there is this risk that takes the edge off the enjoyment of being there.
And that is Paul Henry talking to our reporter Amy Williams. A new study has revealed a detailed history of Antarctica's ice shelves, including the rate at which they're melting. It showed almost 4,000 gigatons of ice, enough to fill the Grand Canyon, has thawed on the continent since the mid-90s. The BBC's Victoria Gill reports.
Ice shelf seems a very humble term for the huge masses of floating ice surrounding Antarctica. And to study these vast frozen platforms, scientists had to zoom right out into space. Using satellites to make precision measurements of the thickness of the ice shelf showed that in 25 years it lost enough mass to fill the Grand Canyon with water.
The ice shelves we're seeing melting in this study are not going to raise sea level in themselves, because they're actually already sitting in the water. They're already floating. The sea level rise comes when those ice shelves reduce the restraint that they exert on the rest of the Antarctic ice sheet, which then flows faster into the ocean, causing sea level rise.
The effects of all this cold, fresh water entering the deep sea around Antarctica are likely to be felt far beyond the polar south.
The ocean plays a major role in just controlling the climate around the world. Adding a lot of cold fresh water to the ocean kind of changes in the way in which it can transport heat, and that can change global climate and maybe potentially even kind of change rainfall patterns around the world as well.
Is that what scientists mean when they describe Antarctica as the world's thermostat? That what happens to that ice and in that ocean is shifting weather patterns all around the world?
Yeah, exactly.
With many of the world's biggest cities by the coast, modelling future sea level rise accurately is crucial. This study reveals just how much of that accuracy depends on understanding what's happening to the ice at the end of the world.
OK, we've got a little bit of time for feedback before the 6 o'clock news on the alleged homeless man taking advantage of managed isolation. This person says Michael Woodhouse should be made to pay for the investigation out of his own pocket. He has wasted taxpayer money. Someone else says, why didn't Woodhouse dig his own dirt instead of wasting public time and resources to do with third-party claims he couldn't back up? That is from Penny. And on National's gang policy, Aaron says in all the years National's been getting tough on crime, it seems to me they have produced little in terms of progress.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. Judith Collins is challenging Jacinda Ardern to be upfront with the public about how she will vote in the upcoming cannabis referendum. The Labour leader has repeatedly refused to reveal her stance, saying she will respect the will of the public and not try to influence people. But the National leader says that's codswallop.
This is a very crucial vote, and New Zealanders need to know where the Prime Minister stands. I'm happy to say where I stand on it.
Judith Collins says she supports medicinal cannabis but strongly opposes recreational cannabis as she worries about its effect on people's mental health. She told Checkpoint the entire National Caucus opposes the Cannabis Legislation and Control Bill. Checkpoint has confirmed a homeless man did stay in managed isolation at Auckland's Crown Plaza Hotel in June, as claimed at the time by National's health spokesperson Michael Woodhouse, but he had every right to be there because he'd returned from overseas. Mr Woodhouse said the man had breached security to sneak into the hotel and stay for free, but documents obtained by Checkpoint show he accessed the hotel legitimately after arriving on a flight from Melbourne. The documents also show arrivals at the Crown Plaza were only allowed off the bus and into the hotel when directed by staff, meaning no one could walk in off the street. A major review of Auckland's council-controlled organisations has concluded the city doesn't need and can't afford its 4 stadiums. An independent panel led by Auckland lawyer Miriam Dean spent 6 months reviewing the city's 5 CCOs, including the management of its stadiums. Ms Dean says they should be consolidated under joint management.
The stadium strategy has now been in gestation for some 8 years, and yet there are some looming decisions to be made about investment in our stadiums. We put it very clearly and directly in our report on behalf of Aucklanders. We do not need, nor can we afford, 4 stadiums.
Miriam Dean. The panel also recommends merging Regional Facilities Auckland with Auckland Tourism, Events and Economic Development. Part of a retirement village in Christchurch has been under strict lockdown since several of its residents showed respiratory illness symptoms. In a letter to the residents' family members, the village Palm says that as a precaution, those residents have been tested for COVID-19. Owner Jenny Stokes says the chances of the swabs returning a positive result are low, but risks can't be taken. She says even if the results are negative, other residents should be shielded against the flu or other respiratory illnesses. The Canterbury District Health Board says it's working to establish the facts before any public statements are made. The High Court jury in the Auckland trial of a former school teacher accused of abusing teenage boys will head into its 12th hour of deliberations tomorrow. Benjamin Swan is defending 10 charges of doing an indecent act on a young person. Justice Moore has now given the jurors a majority verdict direction, permitting them to return verdicts on which 11 of the 12 agree. They'll resume their deliberations tomorrow morning. McDonald's has begun legal action against its former chief executive, Steve Easterbrook, saying he lied about sexual relationships with employees and tried to cover them up. With the details, here's the BBC's Michelle Fleury.
McDonald's fight with its former boss has gone public. Steve Easterbrook left the company with a hefty payout last November after being ousted for engaging in a consensual affair with an employee. Now McDonald's is suing to get its money back. The fast food giant has accused Mr Easterbrook of trying to hide 3 additional relationships with staff and of trying to conceal evidence. In its lawsuit, McDonald's said it recently found emails in which the former CEO was sending himself nude photos, including pictures of those employees.
Michelle Fleury with that report. It's coming up to 4 minutes past 6. New Warriors consultant Phil Gould is urging all NRL clubs to increase diversity in their management and governance roles. More than half of NRL players have Māori, Pasifika or Indigenous Australian heritage, but none of the 18 teams' head coaches have those backgrounds, now that Warriors coach Stephen Kearney has been sacked. Speaking to Channel 9, Sonny Bill Williams, who's back in Australia to play for the Roosters, called on Gould to promote Māori and Pasifika players at the Warriors. Gould, who has coached 2 sides to NRL premierships, says he accepts it's a challenge that can't be shied away from.
It's really important that our administrative roles and roles within, from coaching to all sorts of roles within professional rugby league, are given the opportunity at least to be a part of that, and that it reflects the demographic of our playing ranks and those that support our game and play our game.
Phil Gould. Rugby Australia is mooting a domestic Super Rugby competition for next year with the potential inclusion of a team from Japan and Fiji, if New Zealand won't agree to allow 5 Australian sides in a Trans-Tasman competition. New Zealand Rugby is proposing an 8-team competition with the 5 local franchises plus 2 from Australia and 1 from the Pacific. Rugby Australia's Chief Executive Rob Clark is not budging on fielding 5 Australian teams, saying next year's competition format could be in place for the long term. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a lockdown edition of Raising the Bar, in which academics deliver pub talks from home. We have a window on the world of prisoners using a new voicemail app that keeps them in touch with their families. Trevor Riki interviews Wu Man, master of the pipa, a Chinese lute. And Anita Hall is back to discuss our relationship with the rest of the world. She's even edited a book about it on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, scattered showers, possibly heavy. Auckland to Waitomo, Taumaranui, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Rain heavy at times, easing from tonight. Areas of low cloud and fog at first tomorrow, then fine spells and isolated showers. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Taihape, periods of rain. Heavy falls are possible for the Wairoa district tomorrow and snowfall possible for the Desert Road. Taranaki to Kapiti, partly cloudy. Rain north of Kapiti, clearing tomorrow. Wellington and Wairarapa, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine tonight. However, rain about northern Wairarapa for a time tonight. Cloudy periods and the odd shower tomorrow, but remaining fine in Nelson. Bulla and Westland, fine spells, a few showers in Bulla tomorrow evening. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers about Fiordland and the south coast. Generally fine elsewhere, but scattered showers tomorrow morning. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the odd shower. RNZ National, it's coming up to 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A highly critical review of organisations controlled by Auckland Council paints a picture of dysfunction and a lack of accountability. The 5 so-called CCOs, Auckland Transport, Panuku, Watercare, Auckland Tourism Events and Economic Development and Facilities Auckland, account for 2/3 of the council's services and assets and suck up about half of its operational budget. The $800,000 independent report that took 6 months makes 64 recommendations, including merging 2 of its events organisations to save $67 million over the next decade. It also found no clear strategic direction for council-controlled organisations, a lack of collaboration, duplicated services and poor and patchy information flow. Mayor Phil Goff, who promised the review as part of his 2019 re-election campaign, joins me now. Kia ora, Mr. Goff.
Kia ora, Lisa.
This kind of reads like a bit of a schmozzle, is it?
Oh, I think you're being a little bit tough. I heard you earlier in the afternoon mention the word dysfunction, so I did a quick electronic check of what the report said. The word dysfunction doesn't appear anywhere, but I don't want to be defensive about it. I set the report up, and I promised it last May, because I believe that there are need for improvements in the relationships between the council and the CCOs and a greater degree of accountability, and that requires changes both by council and the CCOs. I didn't want to whitewash. I wanted a free and frank commentary, and that's what I got from 3 very capable people with a huge amount of experience in the area of organisational reform. I think this report's a really good foundation for going forward and making the improvements that I wanted to see.
It does paint a picture of dysfunction, though, doesn't it? Because they say there's no strategic direction for these organisations. There's a lack of collaboration. There is poor communication. There is duplication of services. And they point out the fact that there's, with AT, far from satisfactory in terms of the collaboration in the relationship, and no input from council in terms of water care, in terms of setting long-term prices. So that doesn't sound like it's operating really well.
Well, if you read the report, and I just refer you to page 3, for example, where they say that no one should think that there's not plenty of successes. There are, and they're outlined in the report as well.
But you're wanting to fix what's wrong, though, aren't you?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I don't want a report to say everything's fine. If it said everything was fine, I would have wasted my time and your money in setting up the review. I wanted to find ways in which we could focus on getting a better relationship, which, as you pointed out quite properly, the CCOs spend half of our operational budget and they represent 2/3 of our assets. So I got what I was looking for from the report. I don't make the decisions about adopting the recommendations. That's made by the council governing body as a whole. But I'd be very surprised, given the competency and the professionalism of this report, that councillors weren't ready to adopt some of those key recommendations. And over the next fortnight, we'll be examining through workshops those recommendations in detail. And I would hope that as early as the end of this month, we would make some key decisions on some of those recommendations to get the improvements that I want.
So what responsibility do you and the rest of the councillors take for this situation? Because some of the things, like clear strategic direction, are supposed to be coming from the top, and that's you, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we've all got to take responsibility for this, the CCOs, myself, the executive leadership team at council and councillors themselves. But I'm not interested in a blame game to say, look, it's their fault, it's not my fault. I'm interested in getting the improvements that I believe Aucklanders actually want. And we've started down that track already. If I use water care as an example, what I found with water care early on was that there was it operated reasonably well operationally. It produced the best water standards in the country and the best standard of treated effluent. But they really wanted, the sense that I got was that they really wanted to keep council out of interference in their affairs. Well, that's changed, and I've developed a relationship with the board, the chair board of Water Care, to make sure that we have a joined-up approach, and we really need that, and that's demonstrated by the fact that, as a result of a 1 in 200 year drought, we are facing challenges with water resilience, and we need to improve our strategic development in that area. So those changes are already partly underway, and what this review basically does is confirm that the concerns that I had in this area were absolutely justified, and that we need to make change, and there will be change.
So in terms of those face-to-face relationships, how often do you visit these CCOs? How often do you go into the building? Because this report is recommending that you spend at least, half a day at each of them in a year. So when was the last time you visited all 5 of them and spent half a day?
I've just come off a phone call from the chair of the Water Care Board, and I would have been on the phone to her 2 or 3 times a week at least.
No, but this is a visit, isn't it? The recommendation is that you actually go there.
Yeah. It doesn't matter whether it's a physical visit or a communication, or they come and see us. I've visited all of the CCOs, and I meet with them quite regularly. And I guess what you won't read in a report, because it's not a structural thing, it's more building the relationships. The changes that I've made and the appointments that we have made, both at the board chair level and the CEO level of the CCOs, has considerably improved the relationships and the meaningful nature of the relationships that I can have with the governance bodies for the CCOs. And that's where my relationship properly lies. Not so much with the CEOs, although I meet with them regularly as well, but with the chair of the board. We've made changes to the makeup of the board, we've made changes to the chairs of the board, and in fact we've made changes to the CEOs as well, and there'll be more to come.
We're almost out of time, but I want to talk to you about the stadiums, 4 of them. This report says we can't really afford them. So what, are you going to ditch one, sell it off, build some houses on it maybe?
I think what the report has said is right, and it confirms the discussions that I've had with different groups. Look, we need $350 million of work done on Mount Smart. Mount Eden needs $500 to $800 million worth. Western Springs, $80 million worth. If we set up a new stadium, it would be $1 to $2 billion. We don't have money to throw at duplication of facilities. And what this report says about the need for the council stadiums to work closely with the Eden Park Trust Board is absolutely right. And I've started discussions with the chair of the Eden Park Trust Board and discussions with the government as to taking over the appointment of the members of the board from central government. They appoint 5, that's more than half of the board members. They don't put money into it, we put money into it. It's in our city.
So will you get rid of any of those assets? Get rid of any of them?
If you ask me the question, are we going to spend money on each of those assets? No, we simply don't have that money. What we've been doing is talking to some of the major.
So will you get rid of one of them? Consolidate then, one or more of them?
I think it's extremely unlikely, for example, that we're going to spend $350 million in upgrading Mount Smart Stadium when the Warriors could easily play at Eden Park. And the Warriors chief executive, I think, is coming around to that way of thinking. We've had people working as mediators with the different sporting organisations. Sometimes hard to corral them all together and to get agreement. But those discussions are starting, or have started, and are proving fruitful.
So let me put it another way. Is the life of some of those stadiums coming to an end as far as the council is concerned?
Yeah, look, stadiums don't make money, they cost money, and if we can have all of the major sporting codes playing on rectangular fields, playing on the one field, that would, and making sure that was at optimal standards, that would be better than trying to spread your money over 3 or 4 different stadia. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yes or no, sell some of them?
We will be bringing them together to operate to the extent that we can out of one stadium rather than all of them.
So sitting on the fence with that one. Thanks, Phil Goff. That is the Mayor of Auckland, Phil Goff, joining us there to talk about a report that was issued today into the council-controlled organisations. The recovery of the Pike River Mines entry tunnel has been halted after the discovery of a carcinogenic residue. It has been found on the walls, the roof and mining equipment, and could even be on Russell Smith's loader that was shown off to media last week. As Conan Young reports, all work has stopped, including examination of exhibits by police.
The head of the Pike River Recovery Agency, Dave Gawn, says the material was first discovered last week and promptly sent away for testing. He says the 6-man team working underground was pulled out this morning as soon as the results came back, showing it was a potentially hazardous substance. WorkSafe has been notified and further tests are being done to work out what sort of carcinogen it is.
As we progress into the mine, we're getting into territory that has not had eyes on it since the first explosion, and we're discovering, the unknowns that we always anticipated, and this was one of them. But it is not unusual, from my understanding, for a mine that has had either an explosion or been on fire to have some carcinogens as a residue.
Asked whether the men should have been pulled out when the material was first discovered, instead of waiting a number of days for the test results to come back, Dave Gawn said they were still afforded a level of safety by the equipment they used underground. The
PPE that they are required to wear includes protective gloves, goggles, and the wording we use is dust masks when required or as required.
He's not clear whether the police handling exhibits from the mine, including Russell Smith's loader, also wore masks. But he says they'll be included in a detailed risk assessment the agency will now undertake to work out how the recovery can continue in a safe manner. He says delays have been factored into the new $51 million budget the agency is now working with.
But we've had, in the interim, of course, COVID-19. We've got this potential delay now. And I'm sure there will be other factors that are unknown to us at this stage as we progress further down the drift.
Sonia Rockhouse, whose son Ben died in the mine, says it remains to be seen what impact the material may have had on the workers' health.
They've all got families and so like I said before, we wouldn't want anything to happen to them or, have them to have health problems through doing what they're doing. We wouldn't want that at all.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the agency had no choice but to pull the mines rescue team out as soon as the material was shown to be a carcinogen.
Safety comes first, and that has always been our position on the re-entry. We've reached some considerable milestones, gone further into the drift than has been achieved to date, and I know what a difference that has made for the families, but they've always been clear that we have to do everything safely.
Dave Gawn is hoping to hear back in the next few days what sort of carcinogen the recovery team and the police may have been exposed to. Mō te hotaka o te ahi, ko Conan Young tēnei.
Dunedin churchgoers have begun cleaning up after a fire broke out in the roof of St Paul's Cathedral early this morning. Firefighters were called to the Anglican Cathedral at the corner of Moray Place and Stewart Street. They still don't know what caused the blaze, but there are no signs of arson at this stage. And while large areas have been badly damaged, it's hoped services could resume as early as tomorrow. Tess Brunton filed this report from Dunedin.
Flashing lights broke through the darkness as firefighters fought to prevent the rooftop fire from spreading through St Paul's Cathedral after it broke out around 3:30 this morning. The Dean of Dunedin, the Very Reverend Dr Tony Curtis, rushed to the cathedral less than an hour later and arrived to find firefighters asking what he'd like to try and salvage. But the smoke and flames died down before dawn, with slate tiles removed to ensure the fire was out. Then, he says, their work began.
We want to make it safe. Our priority is to make sure everybody's safe and that the building's safe itself. We then want to get operational as quickly as possible. This isn't going to stop us.
Walking into the apse of the cathedral towards the high altar and choir pews, the sodden carpet is littered with ash. The main damage is overhead, with the sky visible through holes in the roof. Down in the crypt underneath the apse, water drips from overhead, pooling on the floor. This is where worshippers and the wider community host functions, as well as yoga, tai chi and youth groups. Tony Curtis says they hope to have bands play in the crypt, but that will be on hold while they clean up and repair the damage.
You can probably just smell that faint barbecue aroma at the moment. We'll have to get a full electrical assessment done. There'll be quite a lot of work to clean up. We'll maybe look at how we make the building a better building for the use of the community as we restore it from this. So hopefully some good will come out of all of this.
He thanked the emergency services for protecting the historic cathedral. The cathedral's director of music, Michael Grant, raced down when he heard the news, with its 100-year-old organ not far from his thoughts.
There's not as much damage done to the organ as we originally thought may have happened with the water and things like that. But luckily it's superficial damage, and with a little bit of tender loving care it will come right again fairly soon.
Their brand new piano, which arrived less than 2 weeks ago, was unscathed. Lay Minister Bruce Aitken arrived to find churchgoers gathering to see the state of their beloved building.
I could tell that it was nothing like the absolute travesty of Notre Dame and some of the other terrible fires around the world. So it was a great feeling of relief. We will carry on. Today's services have been cancelled, but hopefully they will be on again tomorrow.
Dunedin resident Kevin Thompson says the fire has added to an already tumultuous year.
Considering we're in 2020, with all the disasters that seem to have occurred to the world, including COVID, Beirut and a few others, here's another, a bit of a shock to a society that normally doesn't have those kinds of shocks.
Fire and Emergency New Zealand Fire Risk Management Officer Scott Lenores says fire was spreading rapidly in the roof space of the western spire. He says hoses breached the roof and ceiling while fighting the fire.
But we're very fortunate that the damage has largely been restricted to water damage, and our crews have done, once again, a fantastic job at salvaging items and moving items within the space of the cathedral to protect them.
Scott Lenore says fire crews still don't know what caused the blaze. An investigation is now underway and the results are expected in the coming weeks. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Tess Brunton, TNA.
A former soldier left a tetraplegic due to a Defence Force failure has been given a formal apology and compensation 31 years after the incident. George Nepata received a formal apology this morning and an ex gratia payment for the injuries he received during a training exercise in 1989. Mani Dunlop reports.
The apology and compensation comes after years of tireless campaigning by the whānau, after George Nepata was left a tetraplegic after dropping off a stretcher he was being carried on during a training exercise in Singapore 30 years ago. In a separate incident, his brother Damien received burns to 40% of his body in 1994 when the tank he was driving crashed, rolled and caught fire in Waiuru. Damien Nepata says despite successive governments failing to accept recommendations to provide compensation and an apology, they were never going to give up.
Both of us understood that actually this is a fight that's worth fighting, and we knew it was going to come to a natural conclusion at some point, but that was going to be once we were satisfied that everything that could be done had been done.
Damien and George received a formal apology from the Defence Minister, Ron Mark. However, only George received an undisclosed amount of compensation. Something Damien Nepata is not concerned about and says he is over the moon for his brother.
What it means for him and his whānau now is that he doesn't have to worry so much about retirement. He's coming closer to retirement age very soon, and he's going to lose his ACC income support, and he's going to have to live off the superannuation, national superannuation. So this is going to make a hell of a difference to the quality of his life in those final years, and for his whānau as well.
Over the years, 2 select committees agreed that George Nepata had been mistreated, but when that went to 2 different cabinets, neither took up the recommendations. 7 years ago, the Māori Affairs Select Committee recommended that the then Defence Minister, Jonathan Coleman, authorise ex gratia payments for Damien and George Nepata. Defence Minister Ron Mark told me the family was failed by that decision, and now things have changed. Back in 2013, the government was recommended to give compensation to Mr Nepata, but the Defence Minister at the time refused, saying they'd already received the ACC and Defence benefit. But what's changed since 2013, since the Defence Minister at the time had that stance?
Well, the difference is I'm the Minister, and the difference is that I do understand the military world and the training environment and the obligations that lay with every officer and every NCO who are charged with the responsibility of caring for their junior soldiers. And to me, it's very clear, it was very, very clear from 1996 when I sat on that select committee and first heard their petition that the military had failed, the army had failed in its obligations.
Mr Mark says the issue of setting a precedent has been a constant factor when this case has been considered over the years. But he says the basis of the decision is the government has a moral obligation, not a legal one, and it stands on its own merits. For Checkpoint, this is Mani Dunlop.
The Crusaders have confirmed the Super Rugby Aotearoa trophy has been damaged after the team secured the competition title at the weekend. The 9-time champions continued their reign of success by beating the Highlanders in Christchurch on Sunday to win the domestic competition with a match to spare. But Crusaders boss Colin Mansbridge has confirmed the trophy, created by Otaki carver Bill Doyle and featuring a ponamu atop a carved upturned waka, has been damaged in the wake of the victory. A short time ago, Mansbridge spoke with sports reporter Clay Wilson.
Yeah, there's some minor damage to the trophy. While the trophy's been designed to be touched and passed around, it's been accidentally dropped and incurred some minor damage.
Do you know anything more about the circumstances in which that accidental damage occurred?
I don't. So I just know it's been accidentally dropped and incurred the minor damage. We've spoken to New Zealand Rugby. We've also sought some cultural advice, and accordingly, we're going to be attending to those minor repairs as soon as possible.
When did you become aware that it had been damaged, Colin?
Well, actually, the inquiry from media early on today, because it was sitting on the desk, and I walked past it 2 or 3 times and didn't notice anything. So, that's when we got an inquiry from media today.
How would you describe the damage that has been done?
So, it does look like it's been dropped, actually. It's a couple of scuff marks, a couple of scuff marks on the base of the trophy.
Okay, but you're happy that the damage that has been done on an accidental basis? There's nothing untoward or other things that you may need to look into?
No, I mean, you asked the question earlier on about, cigarette burns and things like that. I can assure you there is absolutely no sign of anything other than scuff marks.
So you'll look into getting it repaired and however it needs to be based on the advice you get?
Yeah, well, actually, when I've spoken to our advisor, they were surprised about how minor the damage was that I was ringing them about. So that they said, yes, that will be easily repaired, but we'll be attending to that straight away.
And that was Crusaders Chief Executive Colin Mansbridge there talking about damage to the Super Rugby Aotearoa trophy there. Let's get to some of your feedback before we head off for the evening. On legalising cannabis, now Judith Collins told us that she's voting against it and that, well, the rest of the National Party MPs will do the same. This listener, Cam, says legal cannabis is a no-brainer. Raises tax, lowers crime and frees up police to deal with serious crime. The proof of that lies in the US of A, which I've witnessed. Controlled properly, recreational cannabis is no different to alcohol and will cost the health system far less, says Cam. We've also had some feedback on the CCOs. I used to work for Auckland Council in environmental compliance, and this person says, I believe a reform is badly needed to ensure all Aucklanders are receiving the level of service and utility that they deserve and that they're paying for. We'll be back again tomorrow, same place.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Confirmation a homeless person did in fact stay in managed isolation at an Auckland hotel, but it's emerged he had every right to be there because he had returned from overseas. Nationals leader Judith Collins has confirmed the party's board is meeting to discuss the role of its member Roger Bridge after allegations he called Talkback Radio to undermine a candidate. Part of the Village Palms retirement village in Christchurch has been under strict lockdown since several of its residents showed respiratory illness symptoms. And further tests are being done to establish what sort of carcinogen Pike River recovery workers have been exposed to. Those are the headlines. Our next news at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
You know, for every month that New Zealand doesn't open, the border takes $20 million of that the government burns through.
Lately with me, Karen Hayes, your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
So cards have Bluetooth hardware inside,